Something or Other Publishing. Wade Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, Sacred Threads, with Paul Aryeh.
Good evening, everyone. This is Wade Franson. It is episode 100 of Created in the Image of God. What a milestone. That means we've been on the air well over 2 years because we originally did not run the show weekly. And I'm not even sure exactly at the moment when that first episode was, but I could not be more proud and excited to have had 100 episodes of Created in the Image of God. And we have a very special guest tonight who's in the studio. His name is Paul Aryeh. And Paul has 14 years of immersive experience living and traveling throughout India. Paul was trained by one of the country's greatest spiritual masters, Sri Kaleshwar. Drawing from ancient knowledge and techniques, Paul offers insights into the power of meditation and the tools necessary for profound change. He specializes in helping people discover how to reimagine their life and unlock the limitless potentials inside. Paul has also founded a spiritual meditation and healing center in Los Angeles, where he focuses on working with vibrational power and healing objects and the like. I'd like now to welcome Paul into the studio.
Hey, Wade, great to be here.
It's really good to have you. I know we were having a little bit of technical difficulties there during the pre-show tech check, so hopefully we'll be able to go without problems now going forward. So, Paul, we always like to start by introducing you to the audience, and I've given you a brief bio, but we like to go deep into the history to your creation story. In other words, where do you come from? And I mean physically in that sense, but also, before you were brought to Earth, there were others who were thinking about you and co-creating you, namely your parents. So we like to go back into those roots and understand a little bit about you as where you came from, that history and background, and then your coming of age. That's like the first segment. If you don't mind sharing some of those things with our audience.
Sure. So I come from a Middle Eastern background, and we're from both my parents were from Iran. So, and they had, during the 50s and 60s, that was their era. And so my parents came to the land of opportunity. And so they went to the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, and then we traveled at the age of 13 over to the West Coast, which was Los Angeles, and where I spent the rest of my adult life in the city of the angels, so to speak. And that's really how my whole spiritual journey began. It was in a traditional family upbringing, and I guess it ties into the whole spiritual journey because, as you enter adulthood, you start asking a lot of questions and you start introspecting as far as, what makes you happy, who is God, and what's my role in the whole scenario. So that then I guess, went through the whole high school, college, and then after college, I really began my spiritual practices, which eventually led me.
So let me jump in a little bit. So you mentioned Iran, Persia in the 50s and 60s, turbulent time there. Were your parents more secular? Were they religious? What was the cause of them deciding to leave Iran? Aside from wanting to maybe come to America, but were there pressures on them to leave?
Yes. I think it was a combination of pressures to leave, change in regime, land of opportunity. Iran at that time, even though it was very prosperous, there wasn't a lot of opportunity. And so we all strive for a better life. And so for them, it meant United States. And then after, after the Shah of Iran was overthrown and the whole turbulence of the 70s, everything really changed for the whole community. So yeah, I mean, it was not an easy life. Let's put it that way.
And did they have religious beliefs that they brought with them, or were they more secular?
I think that they brought their religious beliefs. They come. My whole family comes from a Jewish upbringing, and so it was that whole patriarchal framework that I was raised in, and went through the whole process of having bar mitzvah and being raised in a Jewish community and upbringing.
I recently had a conversation with somebody who, for whatever reason, emphasized that in Judaism there is mysticism. And I wasn't raised Jewish, but I have quite a bit of familiarity with the Old Testament and with ancient Israel and its history and sort of a generalized understanding of Judaism. And I didn't feel that in prior to this discussion. So obviously there is Kabbalah and there's the emergence of Jewish mysticism. But were your parents more sort of Torah observing, or were they more interested in the spiritual and maybe the mystical even?
I think that they were really interested in the more secular and cultural and the basic human values and family comes first mindset. Of course, during
more the social teachings.
Right, exactly. And you go to the temple, at high holidays, because that's your time to repent. It's your time to be introspective. It's your time to begin to understand your roots. And Judaism, at least what I was exposed to, was more of a cultural phenomenon. It was like, okay, great, all these beliefs, all these rules, all these handed down laws that you're supposed to follow, and then ergo, if you follow them, you'll be happier. So
interesting. Okay, so I just think it's fascinating. I've talked to many Persians, but none really who come from a Jewish background in Iran, in Persia. So that's why I'm curious. So how did that affect you in your early formative years? Those religious beliefs. How did they guide you, or determine or help determine who you ended up being as a young man and in your coming of age years before perhaps other experiences?
Yeah, it's a great question, Wade. And I think that the bottom line is that I asked questions about happiness, about God, about mysticism, but I never could get answers. I mean, I was searching for something deeper, and I think I was searching for a relationship with the divine, that mystical aspect. I mean, by the time I became a full-grown adult, I realized that I wasn't going to get the answers and the experiences that I need, because really religion without experience is really dogma, and it's just a bunch of rules that are imposed on you by a structure which says, follow this, then you'll be doing your duty and you'll be a person. But the problem is that where does personal happiness come in? Where does your personal relationship with the divine come in? When you ask a question in a real spiritual context, you should receive knowledge, you should receive information, you should receive divine intervention. You should be able to connect to God, at least that's what I thought, and to be able to get answers. That if God existed within me, I should be able to speak to that God and have a communal type of relationship whereby I would be a better person by virtue of the fact that I was happier and that I saw that same spark in other people, not just conceptually. You know, the dogma of concepts just really didn't fulfill anything to me. You know, it made someone else happier because I'd follow the rules and I'd follow their structure. But personal happiness, personal communication, personal empowerment was what I was looking for. And I didn't find it.
Fascinating. Okay, so then, so as you were then searching for those things and not finding them, I assume that's maybe what led you into, moving further east in your search.
Yeah, figuratively and literally. Yeah, because during the '80s or late '70s to early '80s, I think I had my first experience with a saint. His name was Muktananda, and just that relationship, that ability to talk to someone, that ability to experience the energy of God through his teachings and through meditating, because I got to actually spend time with him and really ask a lot of personal questions that I had been searching for. And basically, he said, he gave me a lot of answers, but he also said that your path is still in front of you. Your spiritual unfoldment has yet to bloom and blossom to the degree that you can have it be like the breath that you inhale and exhale on a daily basis.
Wonderful. Well, I know that we don't have actually a book trailer from you. I believe you are working sort of slowly on a book. Is that correct? But don't have anything ready yet.
I have several chapters about it, and it took me a while to really digest the experiences that I had while in India for 14 years. I mean, witnessing and participating in miracles, experiencing divine visitations, to be able to understand and digest them so that I could speak to them authentically. Having a spiritual experience is one thing, but to understand its impact and to understand its significance is really at the core of spirituality. And so part of my process has been digesting it, so to speak. And now I've gotten several chapters completed. And one of the chapters was to understand the miracle we call in Christianity the Jesus factor, or the Jesus consciousness. And we
Well,
can go into
we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to sort of segue out of that initial segment. We usually then will air an ad for the author's book. In your case, that's still a work in progress. You're still digesting, processing, creating that book. However, you do have a healing center. So let's quickly talk a little bit about the founding of that and the fact that you're going to offer a free 15-minute discussion introduction to one of our guests later. So tell us a little bit about the Healing Center, the spiritual meditation and healing center that you founded out in Los Angeles.
right. So one of the things that I learned early on is that in order to really grow spiritually, you need to have an environment, a sanctimonious place within which the energy can grow and develop and to become tangible. It's almost like having your own camp where you've got the infrastructure of support for spiritual work. And so everything's rooted in the five elements, the earth, the fire, the sky, the water, and the air. And so the earth element is really uh, profoundly important with all spiritual work, because when you have a strong base, then the spiritual experiences come much more easily. So, and plus the fact, if you're going to heal and if you're going to do the spiritual work, then you need to have a plot of land that can hold the vibrations. And so knowing that, that's what I did. And in fact, in 2013, we established at our center here in Tarzana, which is in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. And we developed the energy. We grew the energy to where it is today, which is a full meditation and healing center. When you come on the property, the peace is very tangible. The nature is very strong and powerful, and the vibrations are very healing.
Wonderful. So, without moving to an ad, I just want to encourage our audience to continue the comments, which are already starting. Thank you so much for those coming in. We will visit those in the last segment, and we'll be introducing you to Paul personally, so that you can have that free discussion with him personally. But then I'd like to now jump right into the work that you're doing, and from there we'll go into those experiences in India. But let's start with this idea that the earth had to be prepared, that energy had to be, in that sense, created. Unpack that for us a little bit. What does that mean? And realize that, myself, others, complete novices, really have no understanding of what you're talking about, but very interested and in fact fascinated and curious.
Right. So there is a science to the elements when it comes to the blueprint of a floor plan or of a property outline, and so on and so forth. And it has to do with the spiritual energy. In the spirit, by spiritual energy, meaning that you have to have all the elements aligned and cooperating with each other. And how you can imagine is that if you take a square and you divide it up into four quadrants, those four quadrants represent the elements. And so when they are in the right place with the right orientation, I know this could be a little bit difficult, but just bear with me. Then there's harmony between the elements, and then the power of the elements increase. The power of the elements increase exponentially, so that when you have the earth element that's aligned with the fire element, and the water element, and the earth and the sky element, then the vibrations of that space increase in a positive exponential way. So, for example, if you want to access the angels, like Archangel Michael, whoever it is, when the elements are aligned, it makes it easier for this energy to come and be present. So there's a very deep correlation between the elements and the higher spiritual realms.
So is there any correlation to Feng Shui? And then also, are you familiar with the legend of Turtle Island, which is one of the, I think, Native American legends, or actually it's a legend in various forms from various indigenous peoples?
Right.
Because both of those come to mind as you're talking about this.
Right. So yes, Feng Shui actually came from India and actually originated from that place, and then it branched off. So Feng Shui is only about 3,000 years old, whereas Vastu, which is Vedic architecture, is about 5,000 years old. And so every property has the potential for positive as well as negative, like everything in the creation. So when you have the elements aligned, what happens is that it draws upon that place positive, angelic, divine vibrations, as opposed to a property that has really not aligned elements. It attracts the opposite. It attracts the opposite, and people who stay on that property will tend to go in a negative direction. So it's like that. It's not that the earth is bad. It's just that certain ways in which you configure your property will lend itself to either positive or negative vibrations.
Yeah. So and I am completely accepting of this. What's intriguing to me is to learn that feng shui is more recent, right? Because we think of it as an ancient teaching, but of course, then you go back a couple thousand years earlier. And again, the legend of Turtle Island, which one of the commenters is speaking about, goes beyond the fact that there was one land. The land resembled the shape of a turtle, or that it was created on the back of a turtle, but rather that the people were one, and that the various peoples, often it's the different races, were given different responsibilities to care for those four elements: the land, the earth, the sky, the water, and fire, right? And that they would care for, they would have some responsibility for these elements, and then at some point in the future, um, that coming together would happen again, that unity. Um, and so all of these things, balance, vibrations, to me, the pieces of understanding are scattered amongst the creation. And that's why we love having these diverse viewpoints,
Right.
to pull some of these pieces together. And I'm fascinated by this piece of it. I also, in my personal travels to India, very much experienced, a spiritual energy that seemed, right down into the earth. So now let's talk about your travels to India and how that plays into what you're doing now, and what some of those experiences were that shaped you and gave you direction that you're now following.
Sure. So I guess what you're saying is like, how did that land impact me in my spiritual development, essentially, right?
Well, even, is India imbued with spiritual energy down to the earth because of the 5,000 years of spiritual tradition? Um,
Yeah.
not that it's in balance today. There's probably a lot ecologically out of balance in India, but nonetheless, you follow me? And then how did that play into your experiences over there?
Yeah. So let me put it to you this way: it is the birthplace, or it's spiritual energy is incredibly tangible, and it's incredibly powerful. And I'm sure that your audience knows of the theory that Jesus went to India. So then the question is like, why would Jesus need to go to India? And the answer to
Well, and
that,
there's also the additional theory that his disciples, Thomas, for example,
right,
in southern India,
right,
um, and I visited some of those places when I was there.
right. So the question that my teacher was very much connected with Jesus Christ. He felt that this was a time where that Christ consciousness was blooming and expanding, and so he spent significant portion of his spiritual development to understand the Christ he was and what it is that he brought to humanity. And you know, if you think of Jesus, you think of love. If you think of Jesus, you think of healing. If you think of Jesus, you think of miracles. And in that context, the question that everybody asks is like, where did he get his powers? Where did he get his abilities? And all the saints of India knew that he was going to come to India. Why? Because India is really the birthplace of the spiritual miracle energies that is directly linked to Mother Divine. So Mother Divine is the giver of the miracle energies. So it makes sense that from my perspective, that Jesus had to open his channels. He had to open his abilities. How did he do that? Well, he had to go to India and he had to meditate. He had to do sacred rites of passage and meditations that were linked with the elements and linked to Mother Divine, because it was Mother Divine that wound up coming to him and blessing him with his abilities. What were the abilities? He had the ability to heal. He had the ability to cast out evil. He had the ability to take away the sins of his disciples and the people. Sins means people make mistakes, and those karmas come to you in numerous lifetimes. So, Jesus had that soul which was so powerful that it was inevitable that he would reconnect to Mother Divine, which is the source of creation in this earth plane. So that is where he had to go, India, in order to receive that wisdom, to receive those abilities, to receive the blessings of the mother, to go back and to help the children of the earth.
Sorry, what were your personal experiences then in India? You mentioned the Jesus factor and that you had mystical experiences while you were in India. So share a little bit about that and your awakening in that sense to new things.
Well, I spent many years meditating, spent many years repeating sacred mantras, drawing sacred geometry, which is called yantras. And, the spiritual path is about purification. It's about releasing out your belief system of the way the world is, the real spiritual world. And as I went through these processes, I was able to get in touch with angels. I was able to participate and to witness many miracles. And then eventually, probably more than halfway during the 14 years, I actually was able to witness and meet and experience it with my own two eyes, the physical form of Jesus Christ. So that really
So what was that like? Explain to us how that occurred.
Well, a lot of times when you're engaged in a process of wanting to connect to a divine soul, and the same thing goes with when you want to experience Mother Divine, when you want to connect with a divine soul, you have to raise your vibrations, because it's no small feat or experience to be able to stand in the energy and the physical presence of a divine soul like Jesus Christ. So it was in 2008 that we were at the center in India, and we were all told that come back to the main building, and we were going to sit down and meditate and engage in the process. At the time, we had no idea what was going to happen, and so as the evening went on, we were called into a room whereby each person one by one entered that room. No lights, just candle, and in somewhat dark area, but it was enough light for me to see as I entered the room, and I stood there that form was in front of me. And then private, we had a dialogue and a conversation, and he blessed me with certain things and certain abilities. And the instruction was to go out and to heal, go out and to awaken people to the spiritual path, and to show them that it's possible, that if you want and you desire and you have that yearning in your soul to connect to that Christ consciousness, that it's possible. I know it's possible because that was my experience. And then I think more importantly, after an experience like that, it took a while for me to really digest it, the experience, to understand it, to really contemplate it, to reconnect to that Christ energy. And it literally changed my whole life. I no longer saw the world the way I did prior. I was humbled and in an awe of this soul, this being, and I knew that part of that process was to learn and understand as a human being, that to help others to awaken and really open the heart. The heart is where God lives.
So earlier when you were talking about the qualities of Jesus, love, healing, um, the one that was coming to my mind was humility, right? And so I'm intrigued by the fact that you mentioned the humbling that took place from that experience. And I think, I'm looking at some of the chat, and I know how some people are reacting, who may, for whom this may be foreign, and they may have an interpretation of it that's quite negative based on their understanding of the Bible and or other verses. Personally, I'm very um, open and interested in hearing your experiences. Um, and one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show is that humility also comes through, right? So these experiences should not lead to us elevating ourselves and becoming more full of ourselves. There's this joke about spiritual retreats. I'm sure you've heard it. It's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye. And of course, they're referring to the letter I, right? They're referring to the ego, emptying the ego, emptying the self, however you want to describe it. So tell us a little bit more about the humbling experience, the humility that came from that encounter and from your digestion, your processing of it.
It was humbling because I realized that the world did not center around me, and that I was simply an extension of the divine, and that I realized that I had a relationship with that divine soul, which was profound, which was beyond space and time. You know, um, I know that there's a lot of belief uh, that we're supposed to think a certain way. And it was very humbling for me to put my thoughts about what I thought that Christ energy was and to experience it directly. It was like unconditional love. It was we talk about love in terms of a very fantasized romantic love on the internet, but in reality, that Christ consciousness is to recognize the oneness of humanity, that we're all here on this journey together to reconnect to God's love. And that goes beyond, in my experience, it goes beyond what's written down in books. It's about connecting through the heart. It's about understanding how short this life is, that we spend our lives in pursuit of things which are so fleeting. We spend our lives being angry. We spend our lives being judgmental of other people. We spend our lives in our heads rather than our hearts. Because, Jesus said it so well. He says, it's easy to put a camel through the eye of a needle than to get someone who's greedy to get to heaven. And
Well, yeah. So let me unpack that a little bit. I love that you brought that up because I'm watching some of the comments in the chat, and I don't want to let us react and respond to people in the chat rather than the message that we need to discuss. But I don't want to ignore those comments, and so I love that you brought up that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, right? So there's a physical and there's a spiritual piece to this. So there is literally a little gate called the Eye of the Needle in Jerusalem. And on the Sabbath, that was the gate you had to come in and go out of, because on the Sabbath you were not allowed to transact business. So a camel could literally go through that gate, but everybody would have to get off the camel, and you'd have to take all the boxes off, and the camel would have to get on its knees and crawl through the gate, literally. So that's, Jesus was referring to this very physical thing in that analogy. But then spiritually, he's not talking about physical wealth at all. There's some comments from some of the Baha'is in the chat, and I want to address that. Um, the spiritual teaching, the greatest wealth is spiritual knowledge. But in the Baha'i writings, it says that knowledge is the most grievous veil. That which we know, or even worse, that which we think we know, is that which will prevent us from understanding what it is we need to understand. So, for example, just to address a couple of the comments in the chat without even sharing what they are, because this is airing on different channels. So, people on one specific Facebook channel will see certain comments. People on YouTube watching this will see other comments. People watching it on LinkedIn will see other comments. Not everybody sees all the comments. So specifically for the Baha'is, Baha'u'llah said, I think it's at least 6 times, and in his tablet to the world, he said, and this is the message for the entire world and for the Baha'is: consort with the followers of all religions. So of all the faiths, of all the religions that should know this, the Baha'is should be first and foremost to know. You don't judge them doctrinally and hit them over the head with your teachings and your doctrine. So whatever it is that you disagree with, remember that humility. Remember that we're talking about the Christ spirit of humility. Jesus said, if there is any in Philippians, Paul said, if there is any consolation in Christ, any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others, not insisting that we're right, that our understanding is right, or even the most important at this moment, to sort of throw it at other people and force them to be confronted with what we think or what we know. And it goes on to say in Philippians, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, being a divine being, did not consider it robbery to be in that sense equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Therefore, God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those in heaven, those on earth, and those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So these verses are critically important as we seek to understand another person's perspectives, another person's experiences, different from our own, maybe challenging to our own beliefs. I'm reflecting now, Paul, on how you said your journey was to ask questions that could not be answered at the time by the people who were your spiritual leaders at the time, and the spiritual community that you were part of wasn't giving you personally the answers that you needed because you wanted to go deeper, higher, right? So sorry for this sort of digression. I just wanted to address a couple of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat in this sort of generalized way without calling anything out specifically.
So I respect everybody's point of view, and everyone has a different path, but my personal experience is my personal experience. No one can say that it's not valid, but is that the Father is consciousness, is the fabric of this creation. And the mother, I mean, in Indian mysticism, that you can't have one without the other. You have to have the seed of you have to have consciousness, right? And the seed of consciousness is the fabric in which the whole creation is generated through the mother's manifestation of the father's seed in Indian mysticism, and the joining of that female and male energy is the spark of creation. And to understand that spark of creation, you need a teacher. And that's what Christ preached. He preached the glory of the Father, but he also understood the magnificence of the mother, because they're both components of the same world that we live in. And in that creation, there's tremendous bliss, there's tremendous love, there's tremendous, you walk out in the nature, you just look at the nature, it's amazing. It is amazing because the energy that's vibrating through the trees, through the ground, through the sky, and the creation of this world, one part is absolutely amazing. But it's the divine Father's seed and the mother's manifestation of that consciousness that this world exists. We have to understand both. And it's through, in my estimation, it is understanding that Christ consciousness, understanding and getting in tune with that love, hearts up to that creation, that healing happens. Jesus was a vehicle for God's love and God's energy to bring back harmony in people's hearts. So in a sense, he returned everybody back to the source of the Father, which is consciousness, so that people can understand that the same consciousness that exists in Wade and Paul and all your followers is that same consciousness, the vehicle through which you call Jesus Christ. And for me, it was a huge awakening, like, wow. Because what I began to experience is that all religions talk about the same thing. They talk about it in their own way. And I have to respect all the religions and to respect the essence of those religions. And not to say one is right, one's wrong. They're all branches of the same tree. And that's at least my experience. The candles may be different, but the flame is the same.
Amen. So I want to go to a commercial break, and there's a gentleman who's been on the show before. I'm gonna air an ad for his book, because I want to bring in a couple of the concepts within that book. And one of our other sponsors, Something or Other Publishing, is going to be working on issuing a new version of that book and also the second volume in that book. So when we come back, I'm going to unpack a couple of things that you said and go a little bit deeper with this in light of this this input from another author, Joseph Atman, who has a PhD in the philosophy of religion, and he's written a book called The Philosophical War, which is his reinterpretation of the Genesis story, which we'll get into in a moment right after this ad. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more of Paul Aryeh and his experiences with India and with the Christ factor and his work in the healing area. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Where the battle of minds goes unnoticed, one man dared to challenge the very structure of consciousness itself. Joseph Atman proudly presents the first part of his groundbreaking collected work, A Philosophical War. Atman's mission is to expose humanity's most elusive adversary, the structure of its own consciousness. He argues that the modern human condition is plagued by a thought process that inflicts unnecessary suffering. This thought process, like a stealthy enemy, wages war against our nature. Atman's quest is both daring and revolutionary, to overthrow and replace the current prevailing conscious structure. He identifies the enemy within and seeks a more coherent and powerful ally. With digestible bursts of epistemological guerrilla strikes, he pierces the lines of everyday thought patterns. This counteroffensive offers a new perspective, one that challenges the way we perceive reality. Ottman asserts that humanity's consciousness has relied too heavily on thought alone. He introduces being with, a relationality that harmonizes humanity with the world around us. But the battle doesn't end there. Ottman reinterprets the early chapters of Genesis. He calls for the removal of contemporary notions of God while offering a profound argument for God's existence. Filled with intrigue, simplistic insights, and mystical yet realistic hope, this book is a potential landmark work. A Philosophical War by Joseph Ottman. Available at Amazon.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm here with Paul Aryeh, and I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing your name. Do you want to go ahead and share
All
it with
right.
us?
You said it perfectly, Paul Aryeh.
Okay, great. So you were talking right before that break about God being consciousness. So that's why I thought, I've got to play this. Let me unpack his basic premise and see what you feel about it. His premise is that God being consciousness, and us being created in that image, our goal is to relate to that, to become one with that consciousness. But in that, we've been manifested physically with the capacity for independent thought. Indeed, one of the primary principles behind this show and in the Baha'i faith is the independent investigation of reality. And so the problem is, according to Joe, when we encounter anything, we have to form a concept of it. The way in which we engage and in order to function in the world, we have to process it, and we form some kind of concept. Whatever that concept is in our head, however we imagine it to be in our minds, as we seek to interact with it, relate to it, it's not that reality itself. It's a construct. It's a mental construct with all kinds of baggage. And we build layer upon layer on these constructs, but we're not actually engaging directly with reality, but rather with our version of it, our fantasy of it. And in that sense, we're creating false gods every step of the way as we imagine things to be the way we have to imagine them. The more complex it is, the larger it is, the more difficult it is to grasp, the more flawed our mental models, our constructs. And then they keep us from relating directly with that consciousness.
Yeah.
But it's an unavoidable problem. We have to form concepts. We have to create words to describe things, and we can get very much off in our own echo chambers.
I understand.
Which is why Leonard Cohen, in his brilliant song Anthem, the chorus is, ring the bells that still can ring. I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about your early experiences with Judaism and how you had to look for more. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. It's when our constructs are challenged. It's when our belief systems are challenged by reality that we can begin to reshape our understanding and get closer to the truth. We will never arrive. We will always be getting closer. Wherever we're at, we should want to get closer to it.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to all that?
My personal experience is that one part it's true, because let's see the reality. The reality is that you're in a physical body. You're in the 5 elements. So that in itself is a filter. It's on a different level of density. But when you pray or when you meditate, what happens is that your consciousness within the system that you have reconnects to that boundless source of knowledge and energy and vibrational frequency. it opens us up. It purifies our blockages, and it's about blockages, because the things that we hold on to in this physical body, like anger, envy, jealousy, um, the sense of revenge, the sense of duality, right? It's because we're in this physical body that these separations happen. So it's a process. It's a process of changing your vibrations. You never get there 100%, but the closer that you can get, the freer you are. The closer you can have, the faster you could open your heart and fill it with love, the closer you'll be to God's creation. So until you leave this planet, drop the body, and the soul merges back to its creator, our job here is to work at purifying, to work at removing the veils of duality, and to experience God's love within our heart as we're walking on the planet. And why did we come here? We came here to learn. We came here to change our belief systems and to experience the energy of God's creation. So, although it's a tall order, but what else is there to do in this life except to try to transform ourselves, like your title of your podcast is, to become like an image of God, not to become God, but to be like a mirror of that divine energy. So the question is, how do we do it? How do we transform ourselves? How do we heal? One of the biggest difficulties on the spiritual path is, how do you heal that which separates us from the nectar of God? How do we heal? How do we forgive? How do we embody the divine energy that Christ was trying to teach us? The example that you gave with the camel in the eye of the needle is, he's telling us, change your priorities in life. Change what's important to you, because this life will be over in a blink of an eye. Change your priorities, focus on God, pray, be humble with your fellow man. Even though you don't agree with him or her, respect, show empathy, show love. Do it as if Jesus was standing next to you, guiding you in your journey. The dark side is always there, wanting to feel you negative. But it takes tremendous capacity to embrace the positive, even in the face of all the negative emotions. That's what I learned.
Beautiful and wonderfully said. I want to share a quote because you talked about purity, and then you referred again to the the camel in the eye of the needle, and transcending that, having different priorities. This is a quote from Baha'u'llah. It's something called. It's from a collection of short, powerful statements called the hidden words, and this is the first hidden word from Baha'u'llah. O son of spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. And why this came to mind is the intermix of things here. Like when we talk about the camel and the eye of the needle in priorities, I'd never I'd never looked at this term possess in that light. We think of possessions, right? And now we think of greed and trying to acquire possessions, right? But rather, here we're told the thing that we should possess. And I hadn't looked at the word in that context. The thing that we should strive to acquire and possess. I mean, we already have it, but I guess it's more like polishing it in that sense, or cleansing it, purifying it. Possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. And that purity. So tell us now a little bit more about your experience in getting to this place where you have a focus on love and healing and those things that you mentioned that are the things we need to possess and need to acquire on this plane of existence.
Right. So when you enter the spiritual path, if you really have the intention to know God and understand God's love, what I realized early on was that I had to face my demons. And people don't understand that concept, because if you don't start to recognize that which in you, which you've brought along many lifetimes, are the things that you need to purge. As you purge out, for example, anger. Anger is a very destructive thing. And it is the one trigger in life that will pit us against other human beings and force us to have the illusion of separation of individuals. Christians against Muslims, Hindus against Baha'is, Buddhists against the next religion. Because we think that embracing God, that we need to defend God. God doesn't need defending. You know what I'm saying? And
Amen.
Yeah. And what I notice is that it's all about that some teachers within various different religions are more interested in power than they are God's love. Power and control. You control the people, you have power. But you're not liberating them into the glory of God's love and compassion. Teaching compassion. Okay, what's the opposite of compassion? Enmity, anger, jealousy, greed. That person has something that I want. I want to possess that. And you can begin to see that these seeds are so unconscious. These seeds are so hidden within us that part of the spiritual path is to recognize it, wow, and have awareness or consciousness that they exist, and then try to purge it from our system. And if with it, then we have to seek divine counsel. And it could be as simple as a prayer. Jesus, I have jealousy of my neighbor because they have more money than me. Please take this sadness or this feeling of unworthiness from my heart, and let me be happy just with the love that I have for you, And what I realized is that a lot of my actions were driven by these darker tendencies and these darker habits. They're habits, really, when you take a look at them, and these habits are rooted in pain. Unworthiness is a huge example of how we don't love ourselves, because we don't see ourselves as an image of God. So what I realized I started getting in contact with that which separated me from where I wanted to go. I wanted to connect to the angels. I wanted to connect to God. I wanted to experience love of myself, and really let go of the the vibrational emotions which were only hurting myself. Does that make sense, Wade? I mean, it
Oh,
sounds kind of
absolutely. No, I want to just add, because you mentioned pain, and you mentioned, exercising the demons, right? Um, they're often fear-based as well. I've used the analogy of the demon that possessed me, which was a fear-based demon, and I'll share it here openly. When I was a young boy, 8 years old, my parents divorced. And that led to, for me, a catastrophic situation in which my father kidnapped us and smuggled us out of the country. And we were separated not only from everything we knew, including our mother, but from each other. He put us with three different sets of aunts and uncles. And because he had to go back and earn the money to fight this international court battle now, because the Swedish courts had awarded him custody. And he was an FBI fugitive after the kidnapping, but when he pulled it off, suddenly he was not a criminal. It was an international court battle as to who had custody. Um, and so I don't know, the laws may have been changed. This case eventually went to the Supreme Court of Sweden. The point is, it was so traumatic for me as a boy that I had this fear of relationships. And ultimately, when I did end up getting married, a fear of divorce. And that fear was so strong, it possessed me in that sense.
right, right,
So
right.
I said, as a reaction to all this, I will never get divorced. And I also, built this on scripture, because in the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, Old and New Testament, it says God hates divorce. And I could attest amen to why God hates divorce. And so this desire to never do the thing that God hated was reinforced spiritually with the teaching and the doctrine as I understood it. And indeed, it is a horrible thing, and it would be better if divorce didn't happen, right? But nonetheless, it does happen. And this fear possessed me. Well, it should be obvious to anyone who knows that strong fear-based, almost, demon that possessed me caused me to end up behaving in such a way that I ended up getting divorced. And it was through that pain and through that horror that, I said I would never say never, that ultimately, that there was some healing that came through that, and that demon no longer possessed me after its power was broken by having it actually happen. It almost broke me in the process, but then God showed his love and mercy and gave me a new life, and now I have a beautiful family. But I had to exercise that demon. I had to go through that hell in order to come out the other side.
Right. And it's really interesting. Pain and suffering is the meal of the negative dark side. They feed off of it, and I don't have any issues sharing that on this podcast, because it's truth that the dark forces create pain, suffering, because it creates an energy which they feed off of, but they can't stand love. That it's love. Only thing that the pain and suffering hurt. That's the first and foremost thing. So whatever it is that
Well, and here's
I
here's the
have,
here's the simple analogy as well. So to just give another perspective on that,
right,
um, Jesus said, "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." Right. So the devil really has no power, and there's really no darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. So
right,
when love comes into the room, when the light switch is thrown on, the darkness immediately flees. It vanishes. Love destroys. If perfect love casts out fear. Love is the antidote. It's like flipping a light switch on and the darkness is gone.
right, exactly. So in my process of spirituality, I came to terms with the fact that I had to look at those seeds, lack of a better word, and I had to purge them. I had to consciously purge them. It's like, where does this anger come from? Where does this unworthiness come from? Where does this jealousy come from? And then, I would struggle with, releasing and purging until I learned the lesson behind it. Because God will put you through the trials and tribulations and the fire as they beat the metal to create the sword of righteousness. And there are times where it was very, very, very tough. It was painful to go through those experiences. But then I called upon God, and I said, "Listen, I'm having a tough time with this poison. Help me to rid it from my soul, because I don't want that vibration in my aura. I want to be happy. Even if I don't have anything, I want to be happy. I don't want to walk around with a dark cloud over my head. And I want to have more love in my heart." And sure enough, when I put that intention into the creation, God responded. God will respond. It's amazing. The universe is the embodiment of God's love. And if you really have sincerity in your heart, you can transform anything. And that's what I try to teach through meditation. You can change your vibrations. You can cultivate a healthy soul, And I tell a lot of my clients, I said, there is no heartbreak that cannot be healed. If God exists, it is possible. It may take time. It may require a new level of faith, and it may require patience and a lot of hard work, but anything is possible in this creation if you know how to invoke God's power.
Amen. I want to throw out a couple of anecdotes. Just this week, somebody was sharing with me that haven't looked this up to verify it, but that I think it was actually Zig Ziglar, who's been around for a long time, who was sharing a study in which polygraph tests were administered, and the question was, "Do you believe in God?" And those who said no were consistently shown to be lying with the polygraph test. And maybe they were lying to themselves even, right? Maybe they believed it, but the
Right.
polygraph test told them, no, you
Right.
actually do believe in God. But the inverse of that is this joke I heard, and I have teenagers. We have teenagers, which we're very grateful for. But the joke is that God made teenagers so that we as parents will create someone in our image who later denies our existence when they become teenagers, right? So because they want nothing to do with you during those years. But all of this just reminds me of another quote from the Bible in the book of Hebrews. What you were talking about, the pain and suffering and how darkness feeds on that suffering. Why did I bring up, well, does God exist? Because in those dark moments, or when people, when bad things happen to good people, people begin to doubt that God's exist. We begin to doubt God's love for us when things don't go the way we want them to, when we suffer. But in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8, it says, though he was a son, referring to Jesus, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And we all know that Jesus suffered, like no man had suffered before.
Right.
In his innocence, he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. So there's this cycle of obedience, submission to God, even when things don't go our way. The whole book of Job, the story of Job,
Right.
where, who are you to question God as he purifies us by literally, enabling or allowing suffering to occur. And of course, God is not the author of suffering. We do it to ourselves and we do it to each other. And our ignorance, our lack of skills, our lack of wisdom, whatever it is that ultimately causes suffering. Um, it's not God doing it, and yet we're being trained and taught to continue to obey and also have greater faith that despite it all, through it all, God's love is there.
Yeah. Also, Wade, there's this other component that came to my mind is that there's certain lessons that we came to this earthly plane to learn.
Yes.
And what's really amazing is that when we actually can learn the lesson, that God will release us of the suffering that is behind it. And also, it's the other part of it is karma. Karma is action to reaction. If I did something to hurt someone else, that energy will come back to me, just as it would during Jesus' time. The difference is that Jesus took the sins of the people and bore the brunt of those karmic actions and washed it in one fell swoop. That was Jesus's greatness, was that he was able to turn poison to nectar, and he transmuted it, he transformed it, he gave it up to God because his faith in God as the creator, because everything came from God, then it should in turn be able to dissolve back into the nature.
Amen. Well, we're already a little over time. We do this often, and I keep trying to not do it, but the conversations are so interesting. We've covered so much ground. We'll probably have to have you back to continue this conversation. We'll probably only have time to go through a couple of the comments, but let's jump into them. I'll go through chronologically, and I don't know, Paul, if you've been able to see some of them as they come through over on the right of the screen inside the studio. But Crackers is back and said, I don't always make it to the show, but couldn't miss this one. So you had some people. Crackers is a regular guest, or person in the audience, occasional regular. And welcome back. And I'm glad you showed up to watch Paul. We had Etsy Master asking questions about God encourages critical thinking and intellectual inquiry, especially if one remains open-minded. That was early on. I like this one. I'm not sure exactly what can he see you? Can he see you? The Jesus factor is something so-called time travelers referred to as well. I'm not sure what that's referring to, whether it's travel through time in our dreams, or I'm not sure. Do you know anything about that, Paul?
Yeah, time traveling is the past, present, and future exist simultaneously in this creation. It's just that the question is whether or not we have the capacity to access it. And, I always go back to Jesus, because Jesus had the ability to access time, past and present and future. That's how he knew the lessons of the present, by looking at the karmic imprint of a soul to understand the past impressions and the lessons that needed to be learned in this lifetime. And so, they call it the Kala chakra in Indian mysticism. So it's one of the teachings that I learned while in India and practiced. So if you're, it's a tool, let's put it that way. So Jesus was able to go back in time and heal a person's trauma and heartbreak, and to heal it so that the present day experience could be like released. So I think it's a notion that a lot of people talk about, and there's that, as well as the Akashic records, which is the point in creation where all knowledge exists. And Jesus really was able to access that, and to be able to speak to people's souls. I talk in terms of like what my point of reference, but all these experiences have been validated for me over time, and yeah, it's quite extraordinary. It's a big topic in itself.
Thank you so much. Here's another one. Gabriel was commenting as you were talking about nature, and exploring nature and meeting God in nature. If nothing else, it's breathtaking. We had Brad Evans. Life is a play. It's the playwriter I want to meet.
Yes, indeed. Don't we all want to do that?
We had,
yeah.
Yeah, we also had Bert Lawrence. This is an interesting little factoid. The glory of God came into the temple from the east, and as a pattern, it will happen again. When we were talking about the various gates in the temple, and I think Bert, this is the person who wrote a book on the location of the temple. We had Bert on the show here a few weeks ago. Thank you for joining us tonight. God thought of it first. Wrote, he used to wake up, or sorry, I shouldn't assume he. I used to wake up after having bad dreams from where I'd get in a lot of trouble with the law and get caught. Upon waking, I'd say to myself, just don't ever do that. So in a sense, that was a blessing. Any comments on that in particular or in general about our dreams?
Yeah, the dreams is a kind of complicated discussion, but it is things that we're struggling with, or things that we're processing through, and things that we're trying to reintegrate into our consciousness. The sleep state is a very powerful place. It's how we integrate and deal with a lot of things. The difference between sleep and state. Trance state is when our soul really starts to touch the consciousness of God, and we begin to have a communication with the higher vibrational angelic beings, or divine souls, or even God directly. And that's how it's written in the Bible. You talk about Moses. He went to the Temple Mount on a bed of blue sapphires. The human potential is extraordinary, because it's this incarnation. If we really utilize this incarnation, we can really access through meditation, through prayer, and through going into deeper states of consciousness, to be able to access God's energy. And once you access God's energy, the possibilities are infinite. You can become the writer, so to speak. You can write your destiny. You can change your trajectory by changing your consciousness. And so the way you change your consciousness is by changing your vibrational field. And that's why we meditate. We meditate so that we can process out the limiting factors and influences, emotions, beliefs, thoughts, and to embrace that which we can't see, but vibrationally we can experience. And I think that's really the value proposition of the spiritual path.
Well, Paul, I think that's a great point to end on, and invite that free discussion with you. What I'd like to do, if there is a comment that particularly jumped out at you, one of the ones I shared or one of the other ones where you'd like to offer it to a specific individual, we can certainly do that. We could also invite people to email you, and you could choose somebody that way as well. either way, up to you. We'd have to then share your email. But maybe you would like for people to be able to get a hold of you. So how do people who want to get in touch with you, how would they get in touch with you? Is there a place they can go to learn more about your work, to
Right.
get involved, to get engaged?
Go to the website. Everything's there. My email's there. You can schedule a 15-minute free one-on-one just to talk to see whether I can help you. And then if you choose, if you see
And
that,
that website, is that paularyeh.com?
correct.
All right, let me just go ahead and put that URL right there in the chat. Go ahead.
And I think that's the best way to really create value for people, is to have that one-on-one. And I'm willing to spend the time and to do that. Go to the website. I've got my calendar there. You can just plug it in. You can send me an email. You can ask a question, and I do respond. And that's really the value proposition. That one-on-one is like a thing of the past. Everybody's got AI doing the answers for everybody these days, and it's that's a whole other conversation. It's AI versus God. Who's gonna win that competition? So I like to bring a human component to it, because I think that dialogue and discussion can really create insight and hopefully help someone. And then if people feel that something can happen, great. Then if people are looking for healing, we can schedule a healing where I talk to people, and we can do a distance healing. We can do a consultation. Maybe there's an area of your life that you need some support and some guidance. I'm there for people. And I think that's the best way for people to connect to me. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Paul. I just showed your website for everyone to see, and then I was just asking if there were any final words of love, guidance, of sharing that you'd like to provide to our audience here as we wrap up for tonight.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be on this podcast. I have been looking forward to this podcast, because it's God's way of saying, share love with other people. We're never going to all agree with each other. It's just not. That's just the nature of this world. But if we can see God in each other, if we can open our eyes, if we can open up our hearts, if we can have the dialogue. I mean, Wade, you and me, there's a lot of things we agreed upon. There's a lot of things we disagreed with, but it was wonderful.
I don't know that, just for the record, I don't know that there's much, if anything, that I disagreed with you on. I've just been very grateful to hear you present your perspective, to learn from you, and to share it with the audience. I think whatever points there might be of disagreement, it might be an opportunity for me to actually understand better. So,
yeah, and I think that we're at an amazing time right now. God's presence, that consciousness, that experience is so available. I mean, everyone's talking like the end of the world and revelations and this and that. I look at it as an opportunity to really become closer with that consciousness, that divine energy, those vibrations. And I know that I'm talking from an Eastern philosophy mindset, because that's how I came to understand and experience these things. And I know that for me to come and say, I went to India and then I had an experience of Jesus Christ. I also had an experience of Mother Divine. I also had an experience of angels, and I also experienced the miracle energy. And my feeling nowadays is that the miracle energy is more available to us. The human potential, because of the time that we're in, is quickly accelerating, and there's so much available. It really is inspiring for me. So I'm just here to help people, to share with people, and to do my role in this planet.
Thank you. Well, the only remaining item then is for me to just let our viewers know who they can expect to hear from next week. So this was episode 100, and what a milestone it was. Thank you, Paul. Next week, same place and same time, we will have episode 101 with Randy Pryor. Randy Pryor is the founder of Hope for Husbands, and Randy focuses on the art of reconnecting. Husbands seeking to repair a broken relationship often try in vain to fix it. According to Randy, Ephesians 5, verse 25 calls us to love our wives, not make them happy or change them or fix anything. How can we apply this to establish divine marriages? Randy Pryor shares insights from 14 years of experience in helping reconnect separated husbands with their wives. So that's a focal point, but I don't think it's only for husbands. I think wives will enjoy, listening as well. Single people, people who would like to get married, people who are no longer married, anyone who wants to learn about human relationships with that most mysterious of creatures, the other, right? So please do join us next week, same time, same place, on June 4th, which is actually the birthday of my daughter. Probably shouldn't share that. Oops, rewind, strike. But June 4th, Randy Pryor, The Art of Reconnecting. And Paul, thank you so much. I do hope that we will have opportunity to have you back on the show. And everyone, until next week, may God be with you.